Shalom. Kahalalim la Yahweh Bahashem Yahushai Waharakakurash. Double honors to the apostles, bishops, and elders of GMS who rule well, who I learned this truth from, and salutations and blessings to you elect out there, starting with 144,000 on down. So this is going into some history on the Hellenistic period, right? The time period between Malachi and Matthew, which a lot of you bugged out, majority of you bugged out Christians, you don't even know that there's content between those books. But there's a lot of history, there's a lot of information between that time period that's very vital to the understanding of specifically why the Apostle Paul, okay, and why there is such a heavy emphasis on the Greeks specifically in the New Testament, because it does mention Gentiles, it mentions strangers, it mentions outcasts, but it also mentions specifically Greek, right? That's why there's a scripture that says there's no difference between Jew or Greek, okay? So we're going to get into that history. This is from a book called Great People of the Bible and How They Lived by Reader's Digest, right? Reader's Digest is a very huge company, you know. They go into history, they have a lot of different books. I was fortunate enough to get this book. I live in a small town, so I went to the town center, and there's a Rotary Club where they sell books. They set up tables in the town center, and I was walking by, and they do this a few times out of the year. And usually I walk by, I kind of skim through some stuff, because, you know, they have mostly, you know, a bunch of jargon, to say the least, a bunch of different kind of books, nothing really edifying. But this time I passed by, I glanced, and then I kept walking forward, but then the Spirit literally held me back and said, look again. And I glanced, and I seen this book, and I opened it, and I started looking at it. I said, this is pretty cool, because they go into some history of how literally people lived, how they did things. So I said, let me grab it. Then I looked at it, and I said, I skimmed through the history, because they're going into history, and then I seen the Greek period. I said, no, I gotta get this book. I asked the guy, he's like, it's $5. I'm like, sold, you know. So anyway, this is from damn, I didn't get the photo of the page, but it's under the title The Greeks, Bearers of a New Culture. The top reads, Alexander the Great's conquest of Persia opened the Eastern world to Western influence and began the Hellenistic Age. His army of Hellenes. See, this is a thing in the New Testament. Let's get there real quick. Let me see if I can find it. Just pick onto the Greeks' foolishness. So let's get this word. Internet's been messing up all day. Bear with me. Okay, so this word Greek is Hellene. So when we look up this word Hellene, Hellene, come on. Okay, because there's two variations of Greek, the word Greek, right? The English word Greek. There's two Greek translations, and both of them can imply, really, one implies only Israelites. The second can imply other nations, but again, you got to know that history. The word Hellen is a Greek, either by nationality, whether a native of the mainland or of the Greek islands or colonies. In a wider sense, the name embraces all nations, and then they got to put this specifically, not Jews. Well, why do they do that? Because under their understanding, Jews didn't become Greeks. That's a falsehood. You had Jews in Jerusalem, of course, in Israel, who knew they were Jews, and they would never call themselves even speaking Greek. That's one thing, that's their perspective, but they don't understand that you had many Israelites that were forced under the sword, and that were actually forward in the wickedness, meaning they wanted to join the Greeks and then teach their children to be Greeks. Okay, so therefore, actually, when you research this word Hellen, okay, they'll tell you it's a citizenship, it's a Greek citizenship. Well, guess what? Israelites born under the Greek system became citizens of Greece. They were literally called Hellenes. Now, the next word, let me see. Hold on. Let's see if this. No, that's not the one. Con, this is the word. This is what I was looking for. Slack. Yeah, internet's all messed up. Taking too long. Anyway, Acts 6:1. In those days, when the number of the disciples was multiplied, there arose a murmuring of the Grecians. Right? You read this, Christian says, "Oh, look, it's Grecian. It's talking about a Greek." Not understanding ethnicity, citizenship, nationality, how any of these things work, and first and foremost, how words work. How do you break down words against the Hebrews because their widows were neglected in the daily ministry? Let's look up this word Grecian. Again, very important. Shout out, big double honors to the apostles of GMS for teaching us to look up words, okay? Because it casts so much light. Again, this fucking hold on, let me pause this. Okay, so we look up Grecian. The word now is Hellenistus. Okay, Hellenistus. So again, you have Hellen, and Hellenistus. Hellenistus are Israelites, as it says here, one who imitates the manners and customs of the worship of the Greeks and use the Greek tongue used in the New Testament of Jews born in foreign lands and speaking Greek. So you had Israelites who knew they were Israelites, meaning they weren't in a Gentile state of mind. They kept the laws, but they spoke Greek. To the Israelites, to the Jews in Israel, speaking Greek is like eating pork. Speaking Greek is like eating swine. That was the saying, right? Speaking Greek is like eating swine. It's crazy. That's how, I guess, orthodox, you can say, very, narrow path-minded, I guess. But, again, the Hellenistas, and then you have the Hellenes, which were completely bugged out jakes, wearing the Greek fashion of clothing, no beards, not circumcised, practicing idolatry, worshiping pagan gods, speaking Greek, obviously, having Greek names. These are things that Christians do not understand. Okay. So going back, the Hellenes from Macedonia and Greece. Matter of fact, his top guy was Cletus Melanus. Alexander, he was a Hellene, but he was a Jake. Alright, Cletus Melanus swept across Asia Minor and claimed an empire from Egypt to India by the time he was 31. After the gifted young general died of a fever in 323 BC, Egypt, Syria, and Macedonia emerged as three great kingdoms ruled by his former generals. Greek became the international language as Hellenistic cities were built throughout the Near East. In Judea, as the Greeks called Judah, the Jews fought to maintain their faith and ideals in the face of Greek religion and worldly culture. This fight, led by the family of the Maccabees, was only partly successful. Hellenism permeated Jewish society for many years. You see that? Hellenism permeated, meaning it steamrolled, it swept across the entire facet or the entire way of life of the Israelites. Okay, as you see here. So they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem according to Gentile custom. They joined with the Gentiles and sold themselves to do evil. They even quote the Apocrypha, 1 Maccabees 1:14-15. Many conservatively religious Jews were offended by the naked athletic performances of the Greeks, who held the human body in high esteem and celebrated its beauty in works of art. That's like today. You got the Greek way of life, the gym. The word gym goes back to gymnos, which means what? Naked, spiritually and physically. Because these women, all these polyester tight Lululemon pants, and shirts. First of all, you're wearing polyester nylon. You're permeating your body with poison, with a petrochemical, a petrobike product, right? Oil, okay. And then you got your damn ass out. You got your damn front out. You can see your shape of everything. Okay. So in this place, you hold your body in high esteem, meaning you're vain. You like to, you're literally working out just so you can walk by the mirror and look, flex. You like people looking at you and gawking. Oh my God, look at that person. Look at him. Look at the veins, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with, of course, looking like that, but again, you people are doing it literally for the wrong reasons. You're doing it, you think you're healthy, you're taking in all these protein powders, and then you're getting kidney damage, or liver damage. Okay, you guys are bugged out, man. Anyway, it says this marble relief dating from the 6th century BC shows Greek wrestlers. The gymnasium was restricted to the aristocrats of Jerusalem and trained the youths in citizenship, encouraging a Hellenistic outlook. The public games also offended religious Jews because they were held in honor of foreign deities. So when you really go into that gymnasium, it wasn't just training physically. You were actually brought up in their gods, in their language, in their history, in their legends, in their stories, in their politics. Pretty much how you become a Canadian or a U.S. citizen. You got to study the history, know the national anthem, speak the language, all these different things. Okay, so let's skip around. There's a lot of information. It says here. Again, I didn't snap the page. Salakia for that. There should be a page that does have the number. But it says the art and architecture of the Jews became more elaborate and refined as a result of contact with the Greeks. In the Kidron Valley east of Jerusalem, Hellenistic Jews built large mausoleums amid the ancient burial caves and tombs that dated from the early history of the city. Hellenistic art was a blend of styles from different lands settled by the Greeks. The central tomb above has a pyramidal roof suggesting Egyptian influence, and a Greek-style portico with classical columns. Right, so again, that influence of Greek way of life. Right, it didn't just go to language, and it went to everything. The way you build structures, every facet was influenced. Every way of life of the Israelites was influenced by the Greeks. Now, this is a good scripture here. And the king sent letters by messengers to Jerusalem and the cities of Judah. He directed them to follow customs strange to the land, to forbid burnt offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings in the sanctuary, to sacrifice swine and unclean animals. The worst desecration in the history of the temple at Jerusalem occurred when Antiochus IV, ruler of the Seleucid kingdom, which dominated Judea, enforced the sacrifice of pigs in the holy sanctuary. The priesthood in Jerusalem had long resisted the Greek attitude that their god was the same Zeus worshipped by the Greeks. When Antiochus IV attempted to unify his kingdom by imposing a uniform Hellenistic culture on his subjects, he had an altar to Zeus erected on the temple altar. For the Greeks, the pig was a common sacrificial animal. Right? And that makes sense. You damn Edomites, you guys love swine. So here is going into a bit of the history of the Maccabees. And this is chapter 19. Okay, we're going to go read the highlighted parts. To prepare their sons for citizenship, these would-be Greeks built a gymnasium within sight of the temple. Young Hellenized Jews now spent their days there, exercising in the nude, wrestling, and throwing discus, which was the game that they played. 1 second. Okay. Even the young priests were forsaking the temple for the gymnasium. Jeez. Before long, these young men grew ashamed of their circumcisions, which identified them as Jews in the athletic meets against the Syrians. Many of them even went through a painful operation to make it look as if they had never been circumcised, which is fucking wild. Damn, man, that's the book of Jeremiah says, among my people are found wicked men. And it's like these guys are just waiting around, like you just, we're here sacrificing every day to the Most High, and we're keeping the Sabbath, but these guys are like waiting for some new way of life to come. Fuck. Their dress was equally offensive to devout Jews. They walked through the streets of Jerusalem wearing abbreviated skirts, a short fluttering cloak of bright stripes, zigzags or polka dots, and brooches at the shoulders, and worst of all, the wide-brimmed Greek hat, the badge of gymnasium membership, right? Like these hats today that you wear, the fitted caps, right? Goes back to Hermes, right? It said the worst of all, and that's what we do today. It's crazy. Modeled after the hat worn by the god Hermes, the Greek hat was an abominable sign to religious Jews. To the sullen majority of Israel, this charade seemed final proof of the Hellenizers' treason. The Hellenizers had abandoned the Holy Covenant. So what does that mean? These are a lot of people, a lot of Israelites who trained their children up to be Greeks for many generations, and then they were spread out. Again, history that the average Christian has never heard of, nor will they ever look into. And that's good anyway, because this is not for you. So going here, page 286, we got a number. So it says, with the Gentiles, lucky that was from this page, they joined with the Gentiles and sold themselves to do evil. Within 3 years, fights between conservatives and Hellenizers became an everyday occurrence. The streets of Jerusalem were no longer safe for anyone. Then, to make matters worse, Jason and his followers were thrown out of office by another faction of Hellenizers who plundered the temple treasury, where many of Jerusalem's poor had deposited their life savings. Do you not see why the Most High really just fucking came and jacked Jake up, man? This is just some animal shit, bro. Savagery. Fighting increased with the threat of rebellion. Okay, and let me get this real quick. This is a beautiful illustration. So before I read all that stuff, here's the courtyard. So pretty much you have A, B, C. This is gymnasiums such as the one at Jerusalem, which is above. Right, this is here. I'm gonna get that other pic. All right, were centers of a city's social as well as athletic life. They were centers of Greek culture too. 18-year-old boys spent a year studying at the gymnasium and competing naked in its open courtyard. And what do you think happens, man? Like, come on. These guys are going to get into boogery, man. They're going to, you know what I mean? They're going to be training a whole year naked with each other. Bunch of men. Fucking bugged out, man. You know? It's just bringing in demons and bringing in spirits and making you go off. All right? It says, as shown in the cutaway drawing of the shaded area above the courtyard were surrounded by rooms. So again, down here, besides athletics, the boys received Greek schooling in a lecture hall. Conservative Jews opposed such training as too worldly and objected to the broad-brimmed hat of the Greek god Hermes, worn by the gymnasts, as you see here. Okay. Again, this is history. These are things that really happened. When we read these scriptures, we got to really go into them and see this was a way of life. So as you see here, I like this illustration because this really reminds me of a fucking elementary school, a public school system, right? You got your well, they sleep here obviously, but you got the bathing, right? When we read B, right, that's B. B is bathing. All naked together, man. You got the change room in the gym room and gym class with men, these boys. When you're a boy, you're in the fucking change room changing, and there's a bunch of buggery shit that goes on in there, man. You got Edomites slapping, playing games, slapping each other's ass and all kinds of bugged out shit. I was never into that weird shit, man. But that's the spirit that comes with that. You just bugged out, man. Spirits. So this is how it was. This was the gymnasium. As you see later, let's see, bathing, indoor racing, and an enclosed track, and A for dining. Right? Okay, so this was the layout, and this is where they trained butt-ass naked in the damn courtyard. Right? The gymnasium at Jerusalem. And this was the way of life, man. This was Israelites that came up and trained their children in the way of the heathen. So going back to 288, it says, then came a startling rumor that Antiochus was dead. The people, incensed by the confusion and disorder, prepared to rise. Fighting broke out in the streets. At this moment, the king himself, still very much alive, appeared in Jerusalem at the head of a large army. He had just been forced to abandon Egypt on a threat of war with the Romans, whose policy was to maintain a balance of power in the east. Finding Judea in turmoil, he assumed that the Jews were in revolt. His response was to order a massacre. With Jerusalem subdued, Antiochus went on to plunder the temple. Helped by the dishonest high priest, he confiscated a sum equivalent to several $1 million. Down here it says, later in the same year, Antiochus proceeded from political repression to religious persecution, something no Greek ruler had ever done before. His first step was to issue a proclamation stating that all should be united as one people and that non-Greeks should give up their ancestral customs and adopt customs prescribed by the king. He addressed this order to the entire kingdom and throughout his lands in Syria, Palestine, Mesopotamia, Persia, and parts of Asia Minor. Public officials summoned the people to assemble and hear it read. Okay. Then Antiochus moved directly against the Jews in hundreds of letters carried by messengers to Jerusalem and the other towns of Judea. He directed them to follow customs strange to the land, to profane Sabbaths and feasts, to defile the sanctuary, and the priests to build altars and sacred precincts and shrines for idols. And again, you read this and you think that everyone rebelled or people kept these things, but there were Jews secretly. No, people really were with this way of life. The majority of people were down with this way of life and taught their children, and hence you have how many years and generations of that when you get to the New Testament, and you have all this confusion about who's the Greeks in Asia Minor, who are the strangers, who are the Gentiles, right? It says sacred precincts and shrines for idols, to sacrifice swine and unclean animals, and to leave their sons uncircumcised. The decree ended with the words, and whoever does not obey the command of the king shall die. The king's command was enforced to the letter. In mid-December 167 BC, Syrian authorities rededicated the temple to the Olympian Zeus, a statue of the god which had been sculpted to look like Antiochus himself, because as prophecy, when you go into the book of Daniel, he shall think himself to be a god. Okay? 1 second. Right, this is Daniel 11:36 in the NLT. The king will do as he pleases, exalting himself and claiming to be greater than every god, even blaspheming the God of gods. He will succeed, but only until the time of wrath is completed, for what has been determined will surely take place. He will have no respect for the gods of his ancestors, or for the God loved by women, or for any other god, for he will boast that he is greater than them all. And that's a crazy Edomite, man. That's Brad. That's crazy Esau. Megalomaniac, psychotic, bugged out, arrogant, pride, all that, right? Again, he thought he was better. He said, the scriptures say he thought he was better than the God of his fathers. So that's why he had a statue of Zeus, but the face of Zeus was him, and that's Esau's MO. Serapis Christus in Ptolemaic Egypt, okay? Caesar Borgia with Jesus Christ. Same story, man. The Jewish law itself, actually, it's lucky. It says, self-set up pigs sacrificed, therefore, okay, I read that part. Thereafter the temple was filled with debauchery and reveling by the Gentiles, who dallied with harlots and had intercourse with women within the sacred precincts. The Jewish law itself was the chief target of Antiochus. A man could neither keep the Sabbath nor observe the feasts of his fathers, nor so much as confess himself to be a Jew. Possession of the scriptures was made a capital offense. We're heading into those times. The members of a congregation caught secretly observing the Sabbath were all burned alive. All right, and this is this devil right here, this piece of shit. He committed deeds of murder and spoke with great arrogance. On the Greek coin is the hated Seleucid king Antiochus IV, whose persecution of the Jews led to the Maccabean revolt. Despite his god-king status, Greeks as well as Jews accused Antiochus of sacrilegious crimes. See? Because he just said, fuck it, I'm better than our ancestors' gods. I'm the best. I'm the shit. Right? And then that's why his death was so beautiful when you read about his death. It's what can I say? It's poetic justice. His death is recorded in the book of Second Maccabees, I believe. Second Maccabees. He was begging, man. He said, "I'll become a Jew." The very thing he sworn to destroy. He said, "I'll become," and the Most High rejected you. You were rejected, though you sought it carefully with tears. Okay, so going to page 289. When the festival of Dionysus came, conservative Jews were compelled to walk in the procession under the eyes of Syrian guards and Hellenizers. amid the beating of drums and gongs, trumpet blasts, and wild shouts honoring the wine god. They marched along wearing wreaths of ivy, a symbol of Dionysus. That's why you have something called the Ivy League school, right? Dionysus or Bacchus, okay, which is the god of revelry, madness, orgies, drunkenness, okay. An Ivy League school is going into that. What do you call it? Alma mater is another term, which means a nourishing, all-nourishing mother, mother goddess, queen of heaven worship. Okay, so that's why when you're becoming educated, you're starting to put the pieces together. When you become educated in higher learning, as they say, right? They made that movie years ago, Higher Learning. When you go into those higher learning institutions, you're really just becoming a Roman Greek, a Greco-Roman, worshiping the beast in his image. That's all you're doing. That's all you're doing. Ivy League school. Sounds cool, right? It says next, on pain of death for non-compliance. Actually, it's like that last part. It says their heads bowed in shame and humiliation. That was their humiliation ritual. Next, on pain of death for non-compliance, the entire population was summoned to eat pork. Most chose to live and ate a morsel, but many in Israel stood firm. Okay. As you see here, wrestling was a national pastime. Stand therefore, having girded your loins with truth, Ephesians 6:14. In the Greco-Roman form of wrestling in Paul's time, the contestants girded their loins with special belts below which holds were barred. Okay, and that's why again Paul related with people. To the Jew I became a Jew, to the Greek I became a Greek, to the weak I became weak, that I may gain. Right, so he's using these terms. Though I race, right? He talked about racing, and he talked about fighting with beasts at Ephesus, and he talked about gird your loins. The loins again going into that Greek way of life, because the Israelites in Ephesus could relate to that. All right. Its great popularity made wrestling one of the major unifying forces among the people of the Roman Empire. Even the Jews, who abstained from many other sports, enjoyed wrestling. They had practiced it themselves for more than 2,000 years. For them, as for most other nations, wrestling champions were widely admired and honored as national heroes. Now that part, again, there's no real history to show that. But for me, just as a spiritual, comment, I guess I'll say my opinion, I believe, obviously, not I believe, the scriptures speak about men of war, so obviously you had to train something. You had Gad, Reuben, half the tribe of Manasseh, which were top warriors, right? All the tribes of Israel were warriors. When Benjamin fought all the tribes, you had, 600 or 700 elite, it said elite men of Benjamin. So what were those guys doing? Obviously there's some grappling, joint manipulation, you know what I mean? Like, people want to say, oh, MMA didn't exist, and this, and all these things existed, man. Okay, but guess what? We didn't wrestle butt naked. And how did Jacob know how to wrestle? So it makes sense what they're saying here, but as a whole system, there's no real system of wrestling among historical references again. But we're mighty people, man, through Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, either way. So anyway, that was pretty much it. I hope you're edified. Brought out some information here that when we're reading the Maccabees, there's a lot of history there, but sometimes going into, like Apostle Tahar says, secular history and going into these historical references, it kind of shines a little bit more light how severe that Hellenism was. All right, because again, people aren't putting it in their mind that literal Israelites became Greeks under citizenship and forgot that they were Israelites. For some reason, that's a unfathomable thing to do. That's why, again, when you go to the book of James, where is that? James 1:1. James, a servant of the Most High and of the Lord Yahushua Mashiach, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. Okay, again, that word scattered is not just loosely, it's not a loose fitting word. Okay, Jac is literally scattered. It's a diaspora. Okay, diaspora is where you get the word dispersion. And where were we dispersed to? Were we just dispersed to Europe? Were we just dispersed to Asia Minor? No, we were dispersed to the four corners of the earth. Right? Diaspora, a scattering, a dispersion. of Israelites dispersed among foreign nations. And what did they do? Did they keep the laws? Some of them did. Some of them did, but a lot of them didn't. They became like those other nations that they were scattered amongst. Okay. Anyway, shalom to the elect. Kahala Yahweh B'Ashem Yahushai.